The wine was already on the table when Bumpy Johnson arrived. That was the first detail that did not fit. The room was quiet, but not relaxed. Men spoke softly. Chairs were already pulled out. Nothing waited for him. Bumpy noticed these things without reacting. He always did. Raymond Coleman stood near the table, holding a bottle by the neck. French wine. Old. Expensive. Raymond smiled when he saw Bumpy. The smile came fast. Too fast. They had known each other since the late 1930s, back when money was carried in paper bags and routes were learned by walking them, back when mistakes were forgiven because everyone was poor. Raymond had been there when the system was built. He knew who collected. He knew who counted. He knew who talked to police and who did not. That kind of access was not common. It was earned. Bumpy took his seat without speaking. He did not sit at the head of the table. That position was already implied. Raymond poured the wine immediately. No toast. No pause. The glass in front of Bumpy was filled first. That broke habit. Old systems follow rituals. Rituals slow things down. They give people time to correct mistakes. Speed removes that option. Bumpy looked at the wine. Deep red. Clear. Raymond kept talking. About business. About pressure since the war ended. About new money looking for new routes. The Italians listened. 3 of them. Quiet. Watching. They had driven up from downtown. They did not speak first. That told Bumpy they were confident. Confidence usually means preparation. Raymond mentioned expansion. North of 125th Street. Carefully worded. No demands. Bumpy said nothing. The room waited. Raymond cleared his throat and laughed once. It was meant to sound casual. It did not. You should drink that while it's cold, he said. The sentence landed heavier than it should have. Bumpy did not touch the glass. He looked at Raymond instead. Not long. Just enough. Something had shifted. Not in the room. In the structure behind it. Pressure had arrived. Quietly. The silence after the sentence stayed longer than it should have. No one rushed to fill it. That was another detail. In rooms like this, someone always talks. Talking spreads responsibility. Silence concentrates it. Bumpy leaned back slightly. Not away from the table. Into it. He looked around the room. 20 chairs. 19 filled. Numbers runners. Policy bankers. 2 men whose names never appeared on paper. And the Italians, sitting close enough to hear everything, far enough to claim distance later. Raymond stood beside Bumpy's chair. Too close. He spoke again. About supply lines opening after the war. About ports that were busy and inspectors who were tired. About how things were changing. Change was not the problem. Change was constant. Control was the problem. One of the Italians nodded as Raymond spoke. Not approval. Confirmation. Bumpy followed that nod back to its source. A man with careful hands and clean cuffs. No ring. No watch. That meant he did not need either. Bumpy reached for the glass. Not to drink. He lifted it slightly and held it to the light above the table. The color held steady. No sediment. No clouding. Good wine. Raymond stopped talking. The pause was not planned, but it was useful. You chose this bottle, Bumpy said. It was a statement, not a question. Raymond nodded. Yes. Thought it was right. Why this one? Bumpy asked. Raymond hesitated. Just enough. It's old, he said. Reliable. Reliable was not the word Raymond usually used. He preferred safer ones. Bumpy set the glass down without drinking. The base touched the wood softly. The Italians watched that motion closely. So did Raymond. One of the bankers shifted in his seat. Another man adjusted his tie. The room was recalculating. Bumpy folded his hands on the table. Still calm. Still quiet. He had not accused anyone. He had not refused anything. But he had changed the pace. And when pace changes, pressure follows. Raymond moved to the other side of the table. Not because he was told to. Because standing still had become uncomfortable. He spoke about partnerships. About protection. about how everyone at the table would benefit if things stayed smooth. The words were familiar. The timing was not. Bumpy listened without interrupting. He let the sentences finish. He let them sit. One of the Italians finally spoke. Only a few words. Measured. He mentioned numbers, percentages, delivery schedules that assumed cooperation. Assumptions create risk. Bumpy asked a question that seemed unrelated. How long has this been planned? The Italian looked to Raymond before answering. That was enough. Raymond answered instead. Not long, he said, just conversations. Conversations leave trails. Bumpy nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. He looked around the room again. Men who depended on the system. Men who did not control it. Power rarely announces itself. It waits to be tested. Bumpy reached into his jacket and removed nothing. The motion alone drew attention. Hands shifted. Postures changed. He stopped and rested his arm on the table. No decisions tonight, he said. The Italians exchanged looks. This was not expected. Raymond frowned. Bump, this is just business, he said. Bumpy turned his head slightly. Exactly. He stood, not abruptly, deliberately. The meeting paused because he paused it. No one challenged that. Two men near the door adjusted their stance. Not blocking, just present. Bumpy looked at the wine one last time, still untouched. He did not comment on it. He did not need to. He left the room without hurry. Behind him, voices started again. Lower. Faster. Outside, Harlem moved as it always did. Cars passed. Music spilled from doorways. Inside the system, something had changed. The test had begun. The response came the next morning. Not a call. Not a warning. A delay. Two runners arrived late to their routes. One did not arrive at all. By noon, the count was short by a small amount. Not enough to cause alarm. Enough to be noticed. Bumpy did not comment. He walked his usual route. Stopped at the same storefronts. Spoke to the same men. He listened. By afternoon, a bookmaker mentioned being asked a question by someone he did not recognize. The question was simple. Who handles collections on Wednesdays? That question had a cost. Bumpy marked it mentally. He did not react. That evening, Raymond called. Once. The phone rang until it stopped. The next day, a police car sat longer than usual on Lenox Avenue. No tickets, no arrests, presence only. That kind of pressure was meant to be shared. To see who moved first. Bumpy adjusted without announcing it. Routes shifted by 1 block. Times moved by 10 minutes. One runner was told to stay home. Small changes. Enough to disrupt expectations. Raymond came by unannounced that night. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. I think we need to talk, he said. Bumpy did not invite him in. He did not refuse him either. We already did, Bumpy said. Raymond swallowed. The sound was audible in the quiet. The Italians are nervous, Raymond said. They want clarity. Clarity benefits the side with less patience. Bumpy looked past him, down the street. A car idled longer than necessary. Then they should wait, he said. Raymond stepped back. Not in anger, in understanding. The system was no longer moving through him. That realization carried more weight than any threat. Pressure was building. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. Italian calls stopped coming to Raymond. They went elsewhere. A meeting request came directly to Bumpy. Same room. Same night. Raymond was informed, not invited. That difference mattered. When the men gathered again, the table felt smaller. Not because fewer chairs were filled, because fewer voices mattered. The Italians spoke carefully. They mentioned delays at the docks, increased attention from inspectors, costs rising without returns. They did not mention Raymond. Bumpy listened. He asked about routes, about storage, about which names had been shared. The answers came slower this time. Raymond sat near the wall, not excluded, not included. He watched the conversation move past him. One Italian finally asked if the arrangement could still work, if cooperation was still possible. Bumpy answered with a question. What happens if nothing changes? The Italians understood the math. Nothing changing would cost more than withdrawing. They exchanged looks. Not anger. Calculation. They said they would step back, reduce contact, avoid attention north of the street. The room relaxed slightly. Raymond shifted in his chair. He tried to speak. No one turned toward him. When the meeting ended, hands were shaken. Agreements were implied, not signed. Raymond stood last. He waited for a word, a look. None came. Outside, the night was ordinary. Lights, noise, movement. Raymond walked away alone. The system had already been chosen. And it was chosen quietly. The adjustment finished without a meeting. Raymond felt it before anyone said anything. His calls went unanswered. Not ignored. Unnecessary. A runner he trusted crossed the street to avoid him. A banker closed a ledger early. Small acts. Consistent ones. Access was closing. Raymond tried to trade what he still had. Information. Old schedules. Names that once mattered. They no longer did. The Italians had stepped back. Quietly. Without blame. Police attention eased. Cars moved on. Questions stopped being asked. The pressure that had built around Harlem dissolved. Not because it was solved. Because the variable causing it had been removed. Raymond was found 2 days later. There was no crowd. No noise. No public scene. The details did not circulate. They did not need to. The roots were held. Collections continued. The count stayed correct. Bumpy did not comment. He did not attend. He did not explain. There was nothing left to manage. The system had tested loyalty. It had a measured cost. It had adjusted without spectacle. By the following week, Raymond's name was no longer used. Not as a warning, not as a story, just absent. The wine from that first night was never finished. It stayed where it had been left. Pressure moved on. Structure remained. That was the result. Morning came without notice. Harlem opened its shops. Deliveries arrived. Music returned to its usual volume. Nothing marked a change. That was how it was meant to be. Roots held. Time stayed fixed. Money moved on schedule. Police presence returned to routine patterns. No extra cars. No questions. The Italians kept their distance. Not formally. Practically. Distance reduces cost. Distance reduces risk. Bumpy continued as before. Same hours. Same pace. He did not speak about Raymond. No one asked. The system had already absorbed the loss. It always did. Men noticed something else instead. Decisions took longer. Access became tighter. Information moved through fewer hands. That was not fear. It was a correction. Trust was no longer assumed. It was priced. Weeks passed. Then months. The room at Small's Paradise was used again. Different chairs. Different men. Wine was poured more slowly. No one rushed the first glass. Nothing about that story became public. No speeches. No warnings. Yet everyone adjusted. Not because they were told to. Because they understood. This was not about betrayal. It was about cost. It was not about punishment. It was about structure. Power did not announce itself. It did not explain. It moved. Quietly. And when it settled, the system remained intact. This is how it worked. Chapter 8. Nothing followed. No announcement. No explanation. No correction. That absence mattered. Institutions look for signals. When none appear, they assume stability. Harlem adjusted its expectations. Collections were handled by fewer hands. Meetings became shorter. Information moved in narrower channels. That increased control. It also increased cost. No one mentioned why. The reasons were unnecessary. The Italians redirected their interest elsewhere. Ports stayed busy. Routes shifted south. Police pressure stayed predictable. Predictability lowered risk. Bumpy did not change his behavior. That was intentional. Change would have invited questions. Questions raise exposure. Instead, the system settled into a tighter form of itself. More resistant, less flexible. That was the trade. Raymond's absence was not discussed. It was absorbed. In systems like this, removal is not a message. It is a correction. By winter, the pressure that began in that room no longer existed. Not because it was confrontational. Because it was priced out. Nothing dramatic remained. No story. No lesson. Only a structure that still worked. This is how power survives.